I am certain none of you have ever heard of my company. So I'm going to spend a little more time talking about who we are and what we do so that you can kind of put it in context of what we're proposing. Also, I'd like to say that this is kind of looking for partnerships in the Southeast Asian region for us. This is something that we thought about doing for a month or two, and this is the first attempt to do that. Now, so this is the basics. All the mapping guys started mapping streets. All the money went into mapping streets because that's where automotive, NavTech and everybody was. And when we talk about AI in mapping and AI in auto, it is all about streets. However, most of the activity and the money is actually inside. The other thing about mapping is there's a lot more technology than there's actually use of it. Charlie from Apple, they have an amazing platform tracking. They can do many, many, many things, but in fact, not so many people are using what's going on yet. They need a plan, because none of this works if you do not have a plan. And what we're proposing basically is to move indoors with digital plans. So the digital plans need to be drawn. AI doesn't draw them yet. It's going to be a while before they draw them correctly. It's actually cheaper to draw them by hand. And we've proven that, as has Michello. The goal really is that you need to publish these plans online, and you need to start with the owners of the property. So all your SME customers actually need their property owners to participate in putting the property online. And my goal here today is to convince some of you to start approaching the the property owners in your localities and say, this is an activity that should be done. So the opportunity is to sell to property owners plans. Now, there are hundreds of plans in every country that we're talking about, and if we're talking about malls, venues, shopping locations. Tomorrow there are thousands, and then millions. And that's per country. That's not across Asia. So who are we? I like this data's next frontier. Everybody's data's next frontier. I cannot believe we're the data next frontier. Anyway. We're this strange company dealing with everybody most SMEs don't like. These are our current customers. We're a very small company. We could be described as an SME. I spend my life arguing with huge companies like this, and our contracts are large with these guys. Basically, let me just tell you a few stories about what we do so it's in context. When we started to work for Nike in China, they thought they had about 7,000 stores. Now this could be a Yext story, actually. We found 2,000 more stores than they thought they had. Now, this is just stunning, right? Because you kind of go, how do you not know where your stores are at? Well, there's 100 excuses and 1,000 reasons. But the fact is, people don't actually think about where their stores are at because they have an address buried in some book or table somewhere. And just keeping track of the new stores in Nike opening, we process 4,000 requests for stores every quarter for these guys, for new stores. So you need to know where your stores are at. You can be quite small, like Topgolf. This is our smallest customer. They had 5 locations, and they're in China. Well, they're looking at 5 locations in China. It's a large value transaction, So it's worth them spending money for us. But in fact, that's the SME problem is, okay, where should I put a business? And there's a lot of work to do, I think, in SMEs, helping businesses choose locations. Finally, by the way, I would say we finally got our first big, huge Chinese client last month. It is what it is. Funny being an American, working for a Swiss company located in China, and one of my first Chinese big client is Huawei. So what do? We basically track the million stores that you want to know about in China. When we started 7 years ago, we thought we did really good to find 30,000. What we accidentally did is we drew 5,000 plans of venues. Don't ask me why we started, it's a very long story. But long before plans became big, we were drawing plans to basically track stores and venues. And we're stuck. Oh! Basically, we offer subscription services and consulting services. The other amazing thing about our customer set is as big as they are, as sophisticated as they are, they're really bad at choosing and planning store networks. I mean, it's stunning. So currently we have 140 people in China. The key point for the room is we've been moving for the last 2 years and opening up in Southeast Asia. We've been drawing plans now in Southeast Asia for 2 years. Oh. Yes, I can never make the word Darwinian big enough. Retail in general is really hard. Okay, this is something that I'd never wanted to be a retailer. To explain something quickly, I was originally a finance guy. Finance, and went to Japan, actually went to China, Tsinghua first, 1983. I was at Tsinghua in China. Went to Japan for 2.5 years, went to Europe. Went from finance to technology in IBM, saw what happened when the wall came down, did a really big business in Eastern Europe for IBM. All of these businesses I thought were really hard until I got to retail. And retail I just find stunningly complex and amazingly difficult to stay. All right, so we know a lot about China. Southeast Asia we know less. More importantly, your markets are segmented, and that segmented knowledge is critical. And that's what I'm hoping to find with some conversations over the next couple days with the members of the association. I'm going to talk a little bit about megatrends. Now, when I was in Tsinghua, this was just out in 1983. I hated it. I really hated this book. I really hated the idea. I hated everything about it, except for the word now, megatrends. Mega trends. Well, I've had consulting experience. I was consulting for a lot of people, so yeah, I'm going to use it and adapt it. I'm going to call it 2M trends because I still can't use the word mega. So there are two big trends. Your expansion speeds are fast now. Reasons are there's a lot of capital, so good ideas get funded. And I'm talking about business ideas, and specifically retail ideas or property ideas. It's amazing how fast you can build brands, chains, physical locations now than before. Tim Hortons. How many of you know Tim Hortons? Half the room. I tell you, in 3 years, every one of you are going to know Tim Hortons, and you're going to be sipping coffee in Tim Hortons. Now, whether it survives 10 years, I don't know. But they have so much money, they're opening 2,000 stores in the next 3 years in China. And they're coming to Southeast Asia, everywhere. speed is accelerating. But what then happens is they almost always overbuild, and then there's concentration. So one of the things that we do is we try to prepare people, clients, for the fact that as transportation gets better, retail concentrates. And that changes the dynamic. Now, why is it concentrating? Partially because of the internet, all right? You take 30% of the volume out of a business, and a lot of stores are no longer profitable. Highways, trains, subways get better.
Where is that happening?
Everywhere. Everywhere. Retail concentrates.
No, the transportation is
Oh, Jakarta, Bangkok. 10 years ago in Bangkok, good luck going 4 kilometers down the highway. Today it's better. You don't even want to talk about Shanghai. Shanghai now has 18 different metro lines, Beijing, etc. So transportation is getting better. Now it goes through these curves. And as you see a country develop, we spend a lot of time looking at developing countries and developing space, retail space, property space. So you get islands of retail. But as cities develop, those islands disappear. And with that, a large number of shops, shopping malls, also disappear. This is the critical thing. We talk about the consumer journey. Well, the consumer is brutal. It doesn't matter that you have a beautiful shopping mall. There are a couple in Bangkok, just opened in the last 2 years. Beautiful shopping malls, about two kilometers from the center. Very little business, simply because they're not the best. Consumers go to the best, and when you're in the shopping environment, they go to the best. If you're working with SMEs, one of the things you need to remind them is go to the best location, because it will pay for you. How did I get into retail? So I went finance, technology. Oh, by the way, I was AI voice with Lennart and Houseby. How many of you know the company Lennart and Houseby? By the way, they controlled all voice to text 15 years ago. They went bankrupt. Well, actually crooked. They had several other problems. But why did I start this? Oh, retail. I got into retail by working for Charlie's company. I was consulting for Apple. They said, we have this thing, these shops that are copying Apple stores. So we ended up basically creating what Apple would never agree to call a franchise system, but in fact it was a franchise called APMs, Apple Premium Resellers. And my first job for the fruit company was going to all the SMEs, trying to convince them to go on the good point at the high street, or the good point where the traffic was. And most SMEs were going, but I can get 40% cheaper rent if I go around the corner to the other side of the block. And yeah, well, your revenue is going to dive by more than 50% also. So this idea of retail, weaker locations die. This is one of the critical mistakes that SMEs make. And we're stuck. Nope. Second big trend. So concentration is the first trend. The second M trend. Social and shop site. We all know actually the first three are dying. Apple TV, finally, after 10 years of leaving there, finally is paid streaming. All right, so what is advertising today? This is the big part of the talk we're talking about. To me, a lot of your search query stuff, I think more of experience. So intent, I don't live in this world very much. I live in locations and property. But when I hear intent, I think experience. Try again. So I'm going to leave all the social advertising to the experts. I really don't know enough. For a brand, for an SME, your primary advertisement is your location, the shop. It's really hard to remember this. It's funny how people just forget this time and time again. Also, with all that we talk about, 70% of the revenue is the shop. And finally, the shop's success is location-based. Both outside on the map street and inside the building. So, shops are bricks and bytes. This is a chart I did for one of those big guys 15 years ago. It's now absolutely true. You don't tell a customer where to shop, you tell them who you are and where you are. As we said, Nike didn't know where 2,000 of their shops were. How many SMEs do not actually make it easy to be found in the mall or on the street? Secondly, or thirdly or fourthly, kind of one of the themes is we're device slaves. I'm now old enough to think I do not need a device. I can actually look around the corner and say, oh, there's Joe's Burgers. I like Joe's Burgers. I can see it because it's right there. I cannot tell you how many people I've seen punch in Joe's Burgers when if they looked up, they would see it. All right? This is amazing cultural behavior. So if you're not aware, you got to be there. You got to be on the maps. I think that's obvious in my talk. Okay, so basically what I'm here to say is, okay, someone needs to pay for the plans. The property owners need to pay. I'm looking for partners to help me sell property owners digital plans. We're pretty good at it, amazingly enough. So the property owner needs to advertise their property on every platform. So it's not just one platform. And that's what makes it hard, because not every platform has the same technology requirements, the same drawing requirements. So that's why there needs to be a service. Highly doubtful that Yellow Australia is going to spend the $13 million that I've spent trying to figure out how to do this. So what I'm saying in this point is we have an ability to draw the plans and give you the opportunity to sell the plans to your customers who need them. What do you do with these plans? Well, you put them on the maps, but how many times have you walked into a mall, wanted to know where something was, and you really didn't want to go back to Apple Plans or Apple Maps or Google Maps? You should be able to just see a QR code, get the QR code and get the plan for the mall on an app immediately. Property developers need to provide their own plans, independent of the big platform providers. The second thing we're doing, I think we missed a slide there. Or maybe I missed a slide out. I'm actually proving you're not the only one who mixes up. Oh well, we'll stop then. So the lease management system, actually, property owners need to present lease offers to SMEs, to everybody, Nike included. The plans can be an important part of that lease offering. So part of our proposal is actually to make these digital plans available to the property owners to also run their business more effectively locally. Once you've drawn the plans, and we have the data for plans, a little bit different than most people drawing plans for Google or Apple. We drew our plans specifically with massive amounts of data because we're doing search store planning for big retailers. So the level of data that we put into the plans has been quite high from the beginning. What we have is a mature workflow. We have the teams, and we draw good plans. What we're suggesting is that you can sell these inside your geographies and open a new business line or new line of business within your Yellow Pages activities. It will help your local SMEs also. The knock-on effects of what it means to be indoor, we're too early in the game to know all the different ways you can drive this down your value chains to your customer sets. I will say one thing, sorry, forgot one thing. We start with offices, we start with malls because that's where Google started, and we actually started before even Google did, because it's the obvious place to start. But offices and apartment complexes are the next run. So as far as being local and dealing with property owners, indoor plans are going to migrate to every building. Delivery companies need them, local restaurants need them, etc. So this is a very big business. That's me. I'm sorry I'm not such a good salesman. I forgot all my business cards. But at least you can find me. I'll be around for like 2 days. I really look forward to hearing some questions. And I think I've got 7 minutes for a few right now.
We've got time for questions if anyone has a question they want to ask. Got one over here.
Thanks. Eric, you mentioned that 70% of advertising, as you described it, is pure location.
No, or sorry, 70% of revenue
Is based on the sheer location of the store.
E-commerce is 30% max,
So how do you measure that then?
the big chains. We have their numbers.
So for a small retail, it's probably
But
much higher.
who's measuring it, and what do you? I mean,
Oh, it depends on the retailer, it depends on the product. A small retailer will be much more location rather than an e-commerce site. But in China, you have, I mean, retail is constantly evolving, right? So you have internet brands who now have found that they cannot compete if they're only on the internet or are opening shops. I think the most obvious example, because it's big, is that in China you have Xiaomi. When Xiaomi started, they said we were never going to open a shop. And Oppo, which is kind of the competitor to Xiaomi, said we will never do e-commerce, everyone will buy in stores. In fact, now Oppo is online and Xiaomi is in shops. So the combination of e-commerce and physical delivery in a shop is the winning card. For SMEs, I think it's impossible for an SME, the plumber, leaving the plumber out of this story, but it's impossible for SMEs to be only physically based. You need to either have delivery, you need to have an e-commerce portal. Restaurants, especially in Southeast Asia, where wages are low enough to actually support delivery, so you're going to have an e-commerce portal.
but you mean out of total revenue, 70% is spent of people coming into the store.
70% is spent by people coming into the store.
That's what you mean by
Yeah,
location
right.
revenue, and obviously you can measure the online as 30%. Okay.
And it's relatively steady. I mean, I can't use the examples from the big corporates, but I can't talk about it. But basically, it's plateauing. There's a reason why Amazon and Alibaba are buying stores and property. And so Alibaba is moving into controlling all the data, retail data in China. And that's an interesting game because they're big, but they're playing against big players.
But if you're selling cars, then by that definition, it's 100% location revenue.
Not if you're Tesla.
Well, are you going to buy a car without seeing it?
They do, yeah.
Oh, okay.
There's a fair amount of that going on now, I think.
You know, actually, one of our George Blankenship was the marketing VP, one of our investors and one of our investors. He was amazed at the fact that people buy them off because it has a reputation. Another question?
Got one here.
Say this is away from the small business, but I don't think it is. What are your thoughts on indoor mapping within some of your clients? For example, not as much Starbucks or McDonald's, but Nike. I mean, sometimes they have massive stores and you need to know what you're finding there. And then when I think about the small business case, I'm like, well, actually, maybe that's applicable too. But
I mean, this is where technology is running ahead of use.
Yeah.
So the technology of tracking, everything's based on this, right? So, I mean, it started based on that, but some of the more interesting stuff is actually the video technology that's tracking you around the stores. And with facial recognition, they know who you are. Now, granted, I'm in China, but I guarantee that they know who you are and they know what you're doing, even to the point of picking something up off a shelf and putting it. So mapping inside the shop, another world coming.
well, I'm just thinking if you have Nike as a client, if you said, well, hey, maybe we can figure out the layout of your stores across 4 floors, and so when somebody comes in, they can have an experience within.
We'll leave that for another set of technology people and I mean, honestly, yes, it's coming. It's highly integrated. Highly integrated.
Won't 5G accelerate that?
Use the mic.
I don't think the problem is technology. I think the problem is how to use it.
But someone I was talking to about 5G says that because the precision of this will go down to feet, and, yeah, that they'll know where I am in that store, in which aisle I'm in, through 5G. Yeah, that's right.
Well, the inspiration, by the way, is older than that. The inspiration is the big CPG groups who can track product down to centimeters in height on shelves. And if they can do it, you know, for that, you can do it for people in either visual. I think visual likely wins. I think the problem with the phone and privacy, et cetera, I think there are other issues that happen around the phone. But they will track people through the shop.
Final question? Alrighty, I think what we'll do now is
thank you very much.
Thank you. That was very interesting. And we will head into the break, and we'll be back at the top of the hour with a few more presentations.